I read that my reading room was being persistently squatted, so I'm gonna find another one. Uh, okay, so this is the Kubernetes Kind Sub project biweekly meeting. We follow the Kubernetes Code of Conduct, which is also the CNCF Code of Conduct, which basically means don't be a jerk. This meeting will be recorded and probably uploaded to YouTube. FYI. Um, Let me see if we have anything on the agenda.
You drop the agenda link in chat.
We do not have an entry for this week. That's fine. Okay. Did anyone here have anything they wanted to bring up?
I got one thing. I don't have results for it yet, but there was a mention on the channel of the Docker for Windows just released a new version using the WSL2 subsystem, and so I'm going to do a quick run through the quick start on that and see if there's anything that basically impacts the steps that we already have there. And if it's different enough, I'll probably just create another topic page for that. So that way people can choose between using the stable version or the WSL2 version if there's functional differences there. So I should have that probably in a PR sometime this afternoon.
That would be awesome. Yeah, on my end, I'm trying to get some last fixes and cleanup in, before KubeCon. So we have everything good to go, and kind of out of bound for this meeting, but Patrick is here. We will need to go more over the workshop stuff. I know Duffy has gotten a jump start on that. I feel bad for how behind I am on that, but I think we still have time. It shouldn't be too bad. Everyone who will be there will know all this quite well. Probably I've been thinking about. I think the trickiest thing is going to be making sure that people have all of the Kubernetes tools they need for like building, and getting that to work. If we can get past that part, the rest should be pretty smooth, hopefully.
Okay. Is there any reason that we'd want to set up some like pre-provisioned VMs on a cloud or something?
I don't know. I haven't run a session like this before, so I don't know what works best. I was planning to lean on Duffy and James for that, since I at least know that they definitely have done this sort of thing before.
Okay. I guess do you have a rough idea of how much downloading would need to be done to get all the right images?
A couple gigs. Kubernetes is main. If it also really depends on like how they build. I don't think we want to go the Bazel route this time. So if we're not doing that, then they're definitely downloading, for example, the Kubernetes build image and the build container. Last time I checked, which has been a while, was north of 2 GB because it has cross-compiled tool chains for everything.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's going to be very difficult on conference Wi-Fi.
Yeah. I wonder if we can ask people to like run a pre-setup or something. Because the other thing is just like installing, even installing tools, you probably don't want to do too much of that, even if they're not just bandwidth intensive, just the like fiddly bits of like getting it installed on different operating systems.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think getting that list out, like a week early, and then, doing a tweet then, and then, one like the day before the session to remind people, hey, go do a CTR image pull or whatever. before
Yeah,
the session.
yeah. I mean, if we could tell them at the time, like, have these installed and like pull these things, go
Hmm.
ahead and clone Kubernetes. Um, like basic developer setup would be fairly helpful.
Hmm.
Alternatively, we could we could make a VM image, but I kind of think the whole thing. I think we want. It would be nice if we think we can get people to run this ahead of time to show. I mean, part of the point is you should be able to do this on your laptop.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it should actually work fine on conference Wi-Fi if we've done things once.
Hmm.
Um, it's just that like part of what you're doing is the building an image, which is what the workshop is for. Um,
Yeah. Okay.
we should follow up in the
Yeah.
plan for that. Uh,
Okay. Um, I did have one other question. So Adelina and I have also been looking at being able to join another node to a kind cluster. And
yeah.
specifically, this would help with getting coverage on Windows or ARM
Mhm.
without having to rely on an emulator.
Yeah.
Um, and so using port forward, so using VXLAN and port forward seems to be the easiest way to go there because then you don't have to deal with any weird extra ports and routing stuff because
Uh-huh.
everything will just go through the one port for the VXLAN encapsulation. But the she was having some trouble overriding the API server advertise address
Uh-huh.
because that was showing up as something in the on the kind side of the NAT rather than the um, external IP that we would port forward to 6443.
Uh-huh.
Um, and so I was curious if you or anyone else had tried that. Otherwise,
It
I can just
should be
we could just
possible to do with a patch, but I'm not sure how well um say the normal kind nodes will behave with that. Um
mhm,
uh Yeah, I haven't tried specifically overriding the advertise address, but it should work
mhm.
the same as overriding other fields. Um, it's especially since last I checked, it's just a string field, so it shouldn't need like for example a JSON patch to be a specific operation. Just writing a patch that matches it should work. Um,
Okay.
that should be a little bit easier in head as well. Um, in head, we have a new patching runtime, and specifying the API version is optional. Um,
Hmm.
so you could just specify the kind field on the patch,
Okay.
and you don't have to worry about since that field should be pretty stable across Kubetum
Yeah.
APIs. You don't have to worry about matching the Kubetum version that's being used.
Okay. All right. I'll see what the latest is on that because she was trying to work around it last week. And so when I hear more, I'll let you know on that.
Yeah, and if you send
Um,
me a reminder later, I can follow up on that. What I am currently working on is just some nasty code cleanup. We moved off of using Logris directly to make it a little bit easier for embedding and things. And when we did that to make migration easier, we made a little package that just has a global logger instance so that we could use the
mhm.
same pattern everywhere. And plumbing a non-global one through everywhere and getting it to work correctly is been pretty messy, but that'll be done soon. Um, we have one or two stability fixes we also need to land. There's still some flakiness with log export, for example, but I'm kind of hoping to get all that in this week and then given the proximity, just make sure we cut a release before KubeCon so that we don't inevitably have some trivial bug fix or something unreleased before we're trying to have a bunch of people workshop with it.
Okay.
Um, yeah, we're pretty close, but there are just a few things like that that are not quite said right. We also Antonio pointed out to me. So in head right now, we now do kube config management like you'd expect from like say COPS or like GKE or etc., where it just exports it and merges it into your kube config file unless you set like $kube config or dash dash kube config to point to a different location.
Hmm.
So it does all the usual defaulting rules to find your kube config. It rewrites it so that they're predictable kind dash cluster name for all the entries. So they're also possible to merge now. Kubernetes configs aren't very mergeable. So we've like done all of that. And then Antonio pointed me to a GitHub search of kind git kube config path. And there were like 1,300 hits or something. And we just deleted that. It was like, you should just migrate. So I'm going to put that back with a warning that like you should migrate off of relying on that, but just have it like guess at the same path that it used to export, so that like most people probably won't actually break.
Okay. And so I think I missed a subtle detail there. So you said that you're making it easier to merge, but you're not merging the kube config by default?
No, it is merging by default now.
Okay, good. Yeah. That's something I was about to look at today. Because with the Docker for Windows stuff, they've got a Kubernetes 15.5 service set up. And so I wanted to make sure that I documented how to switch the kube config back and forth between that and kind for a development cluster.
Yeah, it should be a lot easier in head when we cut that release, because it will just be a context in your normal one unless you specify otherwise.
Okay.
And it'll be like kind dash cluster name. So for by default, it'd be kind, which is a great name. But it does mean they're definitely identifiable now, and you won't have the nonsense where like you switch terminals and you forgot to export $kube config and you're using the wrong cluster. I think this is going to make new users not trip over kind as much, but it is going to be a mildly annoying migration for everyone. So we need to make that a little bit smoother before we release that.
Yeah. I think it'll be good for advanced users too, because I frequently open a Tmux window and forget to do that. And in the new window I just opened up, and then I'm like, why am I getting a different Kubernetes version here?
Yeah, so, I've tripped over this a billion times. It was much easier to implement correctly without heavy dependencies, to just use a different file. But I spent some time very extensively mimicking how Client Go does this and writing a lot of tests to try to make sure that we're not going to break anybody's config files. And I'm pretty confident in that now, but we realized that the not having that subcommand is going to break a ton of scripts. And that's probably a little too harsh. We should probably still have the subcommand, but have it spew a warning message and then remove it in the next release.
Yeah.
Similarly, the logging change, so like where you have the flag, and if you set like log level debug, it just maps that to like verbosity infinity and spews a warning that like that flag is gone. So it just need to do a couple small things like that. We're pretty stable now. We've things are running pretty smooth. I'm actually planning to put out a PR today to make kind precedent blocking in Kubernetes, and just like wait for and like send out a note and wait for the consensus on that. But I think we're ready for that. And I want to get that in before code freeze.
Yeah, makes sense.
So hopefully that will also mean that we won't go to the KubeCon and find the other nice side effect of that is we won't find that like, somebody broke kind and head again for some trivial change. Fix kind. At the very worst, we can tell people to install from head if we have to, or we can cut a small patch or something. But we shouldn't get into a state where like it's not possible to use Kubernetes. We haven't had much issue with that, but we have had little things like that Bazel build mode was broken recently. Had to like go patch up kind to work around it or something like that. We will de facto not have that issue going forward, which will be nice. So hopefully we can have that in before the conference. I think we could have done it earlier, but I don't know. I'm going to do it now. So.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I will try to mess around with the new stuff too. I'm pretty hopeful. The WSL2 mode should be pretty nice with like the memory reclaim and everything.
Yeah,
Oh,
yeah, and that was actually why I started using kind in WSL2 directly anyway, was because that was a big savings for me versus the other architecture. So
yeah. We've also gotten to a point where it's feasible to start playing around with different backends. I'm not sure if anything else would make more sense on Windows, though. I think Docker is still probably the most familiar thing.
well, one I've been considering is whether or not I should just add WSL2 as a backend that you could use instead of Docker.
Uh-huh.
Um, because if there's an existing kind image that you can pull from somewhere, you can actually install that as if it were a distro.
You can run like a Docker image. Oh, cool. Yeah.
But
So
you could basically you could just download it to a tarball and then extract that. And so like if you wanted like an Alpine distro in WSL, you could just do a Docker pull and then Docker export Alpine, and then um, there's a
that's
command to
pretty
load
cool.
that in.
Yeah, I think we could probably do that then. So like the interface isn't totally stable and it's deeply internal, but my plan was to do something like have like a kind experimental environment variable or something like
Hmm.
that lets you set the backend internally,
Hmm.
um, and then just we can there's like an interface and there's a lot of complexity behind it like node provisioning and things, but
Yeah.
it is a targetable. The interface is pretty small, it's pretty targetable. You pretty much need to be able to create and list nodes, and nodes need to be able to do a couple things like run commands.
Hmm.
So if you could wire that up, it is feasible to play with now. It's still not really in its best final state. I mean, things like I should plumb through the logger or whatever, but it's approaching something that is like, I think it's at a point now where it's feasible. The kind create cluster path and the kind delete cluster path, those commands,
Hmm.
everything except image build pretty much doesn't actually touch Docker directly at this point.
Hmm.
There's a provider package that implements the provider interface, and um, everything's behind that. So most of the code is just doing things like, given a node, I'm going to execute some command on it to like
Yeah.
write syscuttles or whatever.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. We'll have to see. I mean, I don't think it's a top priority right now,
No.
just because going through the usual process of just grabbing Ubuntu or CentOS or whatever in WSL and then running kind as if you're on a Linux machine works pretty well. Um,
Yeah, no, it's more of a like that would be a pretty interesting thing to play at some point. I mean, similarly on Linux, I will be pretty interested in backends like Kata and Ignite to get a little bit better isolation as an option.
mhm,
Um, we've had since day one asked for Podman, so that was kind of the first plan.
mhm.
But the I think the initial win was just that we don't have a massive amount of code that's directly shelling out to Docker, so it's going to be a little bit
Yeah.
easier to like test and maintain. Um, we've mostly purged that, so it's at least at the point now where it would be feasible to try that stuff out without it being
Mhm.
a huge pain, but it probably still needs more work.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. We could talk about that more later because I think I'd want to figure out what we're actually trying to solve, at least with the different variants there, because I don't want to differentiate things too much from the Linux workflow, because part of the reason why I like using WSL is that I can reuse all the same scripts.
Right. From my
Yeah.
point of view, Docker is still the most important one because we know
Yeah.
we can run it everywhere. But there are cases where, like, I want to test memory limits per node, and I can
Oh,
make
okay.
that
Yeah.
feasible with VMs, and I can't really do that when I have a bunch of containers on the same host with the same kernel, without like with swap enabled on the host, stuff like that. There are a few places where like can the privileged container thing is too leaky. Um,
Yeah.
and if we're able to just like take a container image and run it as a VM, then
Hmm.
it shouldn't cost us too much to do that. So like I did a little bit of work upstream on Ignite to make it where it's feasible enough to build something like this. because that
Mhm.
was at the time a fairly simple way to set up. Like, I'm going to take Docker images and run them as like Firecracker VMs.
Yeah.
You'd have to lose support for a few things like bind mounts, but I think just that provider would just error if you try to do that.
Well, I think we can get bind mounts in the Kata runtime though.
In Kata non-Firecracker, Firecracker
Oh,
doesn't
yeah.
currently do anything but block volumes. But
Yeah, but I think the KVM backend can do
yeah, KVM
9PFS.
can do them fine. I think Kata more or less has full support with the like Kimula.
Yeah. The other interesting subtlety to look at is empty dir as well, just because like Kata's got a custom implementation of that.
Uh-huh.
So that way it's not having to, marshal all the file system calls across 9P.
Yeah, yeah. So this is definitely more of a like down the line thing. It's not
Yeah.
important, but it's nice that we're at a point now where like experimenting with that sort of thing is plausible. And I do think there are a few cases where we might want it. They're just not
Hmm.
super important to anyone so far yet. Um,
Yeah.
but the other thing being that like if Docker pulls some nonsense with their command line, we're insulated from it now. It shouldn't be too hard to migrate or whatever.
Hmm.
There's other than the build code, which is still pretty terrible and needs rework. The all the node management stuff is pretty nicely decoupled. So
Yeah. And if you want to decouple the build stuff, BuildX seems to be moving along pretty well. So
yeah, yeah. The first thing is just that code's gonna need to clean up. Like if I run like Go Cyclo over that or something, it's gonna scream at me.
yeah.
That code's been like, it works, whatever. Almost everything about it is wrong. Uh, but it's just been one of those things where like nobody really cares how good that code is because it doesn't get touched much. It's just like it builds a Docker image. It's fine.
Hmm.
um, yeah, and I mean similarly, like kind build base image doesn't really need to be a thing anymore. Like it's just doing a Docker build. So, but yeah, more cleanup to figure out. I'm happy though. We are also getting a lot closer to kind should be much easier to embed, and the APIs are slowly getting less terrible.
Are they getting more stable?
They are headed that way. Also, just because they are smaller, like the random stuff that is incidental is not the API anymore. And we don't import like huge dependencies like client Go in the main binary anymore. It's actually, we've got kind down under 10 megs now for the main CLI, just because we're not importing all this random stuff indirectly. That took a bit of work, but it is much smaller now. The set of dependencies is pretty much all things that any Kubernetes project is definitely going to have and is not super version sensitive to, like YAML and like Cobra and pflag. And like K8s.io API machinery to get like the sets package, pretty simple, stable dependencies.
I want to get more features in that Terraform provider that we open sourced so that we can do more with this on kind.
Yeah, the like power of the core stuff, like all the things that kind of map to the command line, is not going anywhere, but like the kind of the names and like plumbing through logging and stuff like that is been rejiggered and cleaned up a bit.
I feel like I have to look at the changes that your guys are doing with the kubeconfig now, with the auto merging, if that is affecting
that
us.
will be one, and now you can actually like in the API specify like, okay, I want to like pass kubeconfig as like this path or something instead. Yeah, and we're starting to try to treat like the commands themselves also as more of an API. So like I'm working on plumbing through like standard in, standard out as things that are injected, the logger, etc. So that the more global state and and like everything is explicit and hopefully getting stable. That's part of why I've taken so long on this release. It's like let's try to get out the big CLI changes that people need to get around, like the kubeconfig stuff, and just knock that all out so that it's like, okay, 0.6, move, like switch your kube config, switch your logging flags. Hopefully we're done with that.
Sounds good.
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely going to be a little bit annoying to move on those things, but I figure if we can kind of get them up front now, then it'll be easier to get to a point where we're happy to make a commitment, and hopefully people will just need to deal with migrating this release. I think previously the only real migrations we've had have been the images, and similarly, I'm getting closer to just declaring that stable. There's like one or two more things that we need a better plan for going forward, like plumbing details through to the network daemon is not the best, but I think we have a workaround for that. We just need to improve it out a little bit more. Right now,
Yeah, we
right
will
now
see.
It's templated, which is nasty because Go templates are really awful for forwards and backwards compatibility.
We
Because
will
you're
have to
basically just
see
dumping a struct into them.
how the migration goes for us, because we're using it right now in our testing pipeline as well.
It should be pretty easy, but it will require some work. Like if you want the previous behavior with kubeconfig, you can do the export kubeconfig before you create the cluster, and you can code the path that you want, like $home.cube kinds something. You can write that yourself and you'll get the exact same behavior. You just have to move that export line up, and instead of using the sub command, like write the path you want. Like that shouldn't, I'm hoping that won't be super difficult. And then like the log flags, you can use the same one for this release, but like should move to, there's now a verbosity flag and there's a quiet to suppress everything, to bring it more in line with kind of the Klog-ish stuff, though we're also not using Klog.
Can I find something around this in the pull request that merged this change, or?
I think so. I mean, it works the same as like kubectl itself. So there's a -- kubectl flag for create and delete, and it'll read the kubeconfig env if you don't set that. And it will, if the kubeconfig env isn't set, then it will look up your home dir the same way as client go, and it'll do home.cube/config. It follows the exact same rules as kubectl. But the plan for now is to put a guide over that in the release notes.
Okay. Yeah, I just have to pass that to the team in Europe.
We have a PR that's like held to update the docs. Because we do not have version docs yet. I'm hoping we won't need it going forward, because the plan is to just like stop breaking things and then the docs will be up to date.
Well, does that ever happen?
I'm hopeful. A lot of what we're doing is like is pretty insulated, or like upstream, you know, if upstream decides to change how kubeconfig works, they're going to break the whole world. So like hopefully they just don't do that, and then we don't have to do it either.
You're just going to release Kubernetes 2.
Sure. Yeah. Or like similarly things like so like the API for dealing with clusters directly, now you create a provider. Currently there's no options to it, but it takes like variadic options. So the plan is like if we need to add things that you might want to override, like I don't know, kubeconfig going forward, fields where it's obvious that we may need to extend them, they take like the option pattern where we'll just add more options with defaults. And so like the command line may start passing more of these options, but we won't have actually broken any of the APIs, and we'll just make the default some sane behavior. So like the logger is going to be like that. The default for that, if you import it, is this no-op logger that just doesn't log anything ever. And then if you want, like you can opt into like adding our logger or wiring up your own logger or whatever. That sort of thing should let us avoid breaking, hopefully. And I've been putting an eye towards that in the obvious place in the API. Like cluster creation is one that's pretty obvious that's going to wind up having more things plumb through at some point. And we'll just need to have same defaults. So hopefully we're most of the way towards where we won't find more places where we need to do that. I'm sure there's still something.
You'll find them with time.
um, yeah. Well, do you guys have any other questions, comments, anything? We have this booked until noon, but I didn't have a ton of an agenda, so.
I'm good for now.
Yeah, I don't have anything else. Just got that other Docker build installed. I'm going to start digging into that this afternoon. So
Cool. Yeah, and we definitely need to follow up more with like with the group doing the workshop and figure out what we should do about like how are people
Yeah.
going to build this on conference Wi-Fi.
yeah, we'll continue that discussion there. So
Yeah, I underestimated that because like, I mean, I do it offline all the time. It works fine, but that's because I already have a set up development environment. We'll need to come up with something there.
yeah, I mean that was why I'd had pre-provisioned VMs before, because getting remote desktop or SSH on conference Wi-Fi worked quite well, but it's just not going to give them quite the same experience, because if I give them a VM that's different from what their laptop is, well, that's not going to really be what we intended.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel a little like, I feel like that is the easiest solution to the general problem of like, how do you have people run stuff at a conference? But I think like if we can, we want people to be able to do this on their laptops is kind of like
Yeah,
the ideal state for kind itself. I don't know how you do things at KubeCon, like alert people that there's pre-work or whatever though. I mean, we can send out a note on Twitter or something, but I'm not sure how we'll reach everyone.
yeah.
I'm guessing that that hopefully the others will have some previous experience with this.
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, what we could do is we've got a slide upload option. And so even if we don't have a complete deck yet, what we should do is at least put a placeholder saying, before the conference, please go grab these files.
Yeah.
So that way people look.
Has anyone ever looked at these slides beforehand?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I'm gonna ask the group what we should do there. We definitely missed that one. I'm sure we'll figure it out though.
I mean, a lot of people, like if the slides are there and they've got two conflicting sessions, a lot of times they'll look at the slides beforehand to decide which one to go to.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's follow up on that. I just poked the other two on that. Hopefully we'll get something sorted out this week, so we at least have it a week ahead of time. 2 weeks, something like that. Yeah, and yeah. Thanks for coming today, everyone.
Okay.
All
right.
All right.
Bye.
Have a good one.
Bye.